Hi, I'm Stephanie Lever.
I'm Jacqueline Lopez.
I'm Nayonika Sarkar.
Our section, entitled Le Vrai et le Faux, Fashion Binaries of the Belle Epoque, attempts to deconstruct the dynamic and, at times, problematic binaries at play within the fashion system, specifically new versus old, nature versus culture, and centre versus periphery. Our case study, Le Vrai et le Faux Chic, or The True and the False Chic, is an album of satirical text and caricature written by Georges Gaussat, more commonly known as Sem. Published in 1914, the album was printed using a method called pochoir, a refined technique of stencil printing done by hand, whereby the outline of an image is printed as a lithograph and each succeeding layer of colour is then applied onto the space, using watercolour or gouache. Because of the hand application of layers of pigment, this dazzling effect of colour is created and maintained, even 108 years later. It is also because of this elaborate technique, coupled with its impressive size, that the album itself was so expensive. As a result, Le Vrai et le Faux Chic is directed at a very specific audience, members of the upper class who had a passion or appreciation for books. This concept is emphasised by the prints that you see featured in this magazine, which depict a condensed version of the album. The dispersal of Sem's work in L'Illustration magazine meant that the book was able to reach an extended audience, whilst also reinforcing the status of the full pochoir album as a high-value luxury item, symbolic of the wealth of the exclusive upper tiers of French society. Thus, a first binary is set up in the materiality of the book itself, that of class distinction and disparity. This material manifestation of the social binary of class is not limited to the format of the album, but is also affirmed by how its content speaks to a certain audience. The advertisements which have been pasted at the back of the book promote the chicest restaurants and the newest car interiors. What is perhaps particularly interesting about this is the fact that, as we will see, the clear target audience of the album constitutes the very same demographic being mocked within its pages. Whilst this foregrounds the tongue-in-cheek satire that Sem presents, it can also be argued to effectively depict the self-absorption or cultural hegemony of the Parisian upper classes in this period. Notably, however, Le Vrai et le Faux Chic stands at the brink of a huge cultural and social shift, which fundamentally altered the functioning of French society by the 1920s. Published just a few months before the outbreak of the First World War, the album bears witness to the final months of the Belle Epoque and the shifting dynamics as the old cultural reign of French aristocracy was threatened by the rising nouveau riche. Act 1. New versus old. This division between new and old constitutes the first major binary that Sem explores, and which sets the tone of the book. The Belle Epoque is dated between 1880 and the outbreak of World War I in 1914, and was a period characterised by regional peace, economic prosperity, and the flourishing of the cultural and artistic climate of France, centred in Paris. During the stability that followed the tumultuous early years of the French Third Republic, a period of optimism and affluence was launched, especially fueled by the defeat of aggressive nationalist leader General Georges Boulanger and the celebrations of the 1889 World Fair in Paris. Those who were able to benefit from the prosperity of the new era were drawn towards new forms of entertainment, and the Parisian bourgeoisie, or successful industrialists known as the nouveau riche, became increasingly influenced by the habits and trends of the city's elite social class. The precarious standing of the established social order serves as the primary subject addressed in the album, and could be surmised in the juxtaposition of these two individual plates by Sem, one from 1905, entitled La Roulette, and the other from 1919, revealingly entitled Le Grand Monde à l'envers. Inferred from the transformation presented by these two illustrations is the fall of affluence of the French aristocracy, from gambling in Monaco in expensive finery to gambling on the streets in shabby clothing. Released between the two plates, Le Vrai et le Faux Chic captures a moment of transition, the phenomenon of the Grand Monde turning on its head. The binaries of new and old, in this case, are embodied as the old aristocratic way of life is seemingly displaced in favour of the bourgeois ostentatiousness of new money. This binary is also mapped onto the album through the lens of what Sem terms modemanie or modemania. In other words, the frenetic sartorial craze for the new, which he claims took over the fashion industry at this time. Drawing clear comparisons with the work of designer Paul Poiret, Sem uses these outlandish designs, coupled with unflattering caricature of old women, to criticize what he terms the faux chic. In contrast, the vrai chic references designers like Worth and Paquin, who represent the understated, balanced timelessness of true Parisian fashion. The eccentric fashions that characterize this fetishization of the new was not only satirized by Sem, but by many other caricaturists, artists, and social commentators. For example, these plates are from a book by Italian painter Enrico Sacchetti called Robe Femme, which was published in Paris just 1 year before Sem's album. As you can see, using a more gentle form of satire, it mirrors Sem's caricatures, drawing attention to the unusual shape and extravagant colour of the fashions of the time. In seeing these documents all together, what becomes evident is the multiple and interlinked narratives of new versus old that are constructed within the album. The disdain for modomania and the desire for the new is associated with disdain for new money and the way of life that it promoted. Additionally, by depicting these designs on old bodies, Sem uses the exaggeration of caricature to, in a rather cruel and misogynistic way, emphasize the ridiculousness of these styles, drawing attention to the trope of mutton dressed as lamb. Inversely, the understatement of the balanced vrai chic and, by association, the established upper class is presented on young, beautiful women without the signature caricature of the rest of the album, thus giving the style a sense of heightened elegance and validity.
Act 2, Nature versus Culture. Now that you have a better idea of who and what the old French aristocracy was, it won't come as a surprise to know how much they valued decorum. It was a high-held value among this group of people to not only act and behave in an acceptable way, but also in the right way. These rules of behavior were constructed by the old aristocracy themselves, and can be reflected through this promotional document for the book titled Les Etiquettes Mondaines. This document can be seen as a token from an era where etiquette was not only valued, but expected. To follow and act out the rules of behavior outlined within this document and authored by the aristocracy was equivalent to being a civilized man or woman. Documents, such as this one, were integral to keeping the old ways of the aristocracy alive. The New World Order brought about by time and those with new money threatened the authority of these ways of living. As you can imagine, these codes of behaving easily extended to dress. Just as there were rules of etiquette, there were also rules of dress that were deemed either acceptable or unacceptable. This is something that fueled the work of Sem within the Le Vrai et le Faux Chic. He was able to play on the ideals of the old French aristocracy to further his comedic representations of dress outside of its scope, therefore making all other forms of dress seem ridiculous and exaggerated, as well as those who wore them. When it comes to the art of French caricature specifically, it is known for mixing both humor and cruelty. Sem's ability to blend these two characteristics together is not only evident within the 2 pages you see here, but also clear within his text.
Imagine a Parisian of good upbringing, a man of refined and assured taste, a connoisseur of the Parisian subdued charm. Tired of his life of pleasure, he decides to venture into the heart of Africa to hunt the great beasts. Suppose that, against all likelihood, he remains there amidst the Negro tribes for 10 years, completely isolated from the civilized world, without any correspondence or any news, in complete ignorance of the progress of modern life. Suddenly overcome with nostalgia, he decides to make a hasty return home, and in one straight shot arrives today in Paris. Craving his old indulgences, he sets out for the familiar places of pleasure: theatres, music halls, fashionable restaurants. On the good faith of his memories, he eagerly searches through the now unfamiliar crowds for his beloved Parisians of days past, their exquisite elegance in perfect harmony with the city's temperate sky, and whose good bearing and casual yet discreet allure once so delighted him. Disappointed and anxious, he finds but a scant few who still meet his ideal, delightful as always beneath their new guises. But they seem isolated, lost amidst a multitude of bizarre creatures with their paradoxical silhouettes and whose confounding appearance makes him freeze in horror. Some, bristling with spikes, tarsus, and antennae, and sheathed in venomous speckled elytra, are evocative of giant cantharides. Others, in poisonous green, with busts far too frail for their large protruding abdomens, exhibit the terrible obscenity of a praying mantis gone mad, ready to devour her male. Others still, soft, ringed, pudgy, almost sticky, convulse and undulate, dragging themselves along like spotted caterpillars.
What Sem presents here is an analogy to demonstrate the extremity of fashion, but also presents the problematic binary of the cultured world versus the primitive natural world, using bestial imagery as well as the troubling portrayal of race to show how far French society has strayed from the path of the civilized, refined, cultural world of the old French aristocracy. This portrayal of humans as insects to denote the primitive nature of those not in the know has been used by Sem before, as you can see here, within his Tangoville-sur-Mer. Given, as you can see here, the insect is an image not only representative of savage nature, but also of artificial sophistication. By associating the dance of the tango with the insect, one surmises that tango too is an act that demonstrates an exaggeration of elegance gone too far. This document exhibits how, in trying so hard to denote elegance, class, and decorum, someone can easily go too far and become a spectacle. This is something that the French aristocracy disliked, as they always strove to be balanced in everything they did. All the more contributing to Sem's condemnation of fashionable society turned spectacle. The next document brings the concepts of both the tango and the insect together in relation to the stance on fashion Sem is taking within the book. The image titled La Fashion Nouvelle from the magazine La Gazette du Bon Ton shows two people dancing. Although this image is a form of fashion illustration rather than caricature, the comparison is still valid. It is important to note that the silhouette of the dress that forms that of the woman's body is similar, if not the same, as the silhouette of the insect depicted by Sem within L'Uve et le Faux Chic. What is important to note here is that the image of the insect is a paradox, given that it is both a product of nature and a representation of artificial sophistication. Keeping this in mind, Sem, in his use of the silhouette, is attempting to portray how ridiculous the new fashions, especially of those of Paul Poiret, referenced throughout the book, who in fact had become famous for his use of this specific silhouette, had become synonymous with an uncivilized culture, given how they were not designs of the traditional, self-proclaimed civilized culture of the old French aristocracy. What is potentially problematic about this is how he is able to take something natural, the silhouette of the insect and the silhouette of the human woman, and make them seem exaggerated and therefore uncivilized. This video combines modern and historical video footage in order to create an abstract configuration of Sem's construction of the female body, the metamorphosis of humans to insects, as well as discourses of fashion as spectacle and its relation to culture versus nature. This video will also include fashion shows by Mugler and Van Bertendonck.
3, Center versus Periphery. Through a series of unflattering visual parodies and caricatures, Sam represents the taste of Parisian and the French aristocrats, pervading so much in abundance that it polarized the French fashion to the good and the other tastes in fashion. Jean Denis Davies in Le Mercure Galant quotes, "Nothing pleases more than fashion born in France. Everything made there has an air of dominance that the foreigners cannot give to their works." During the late Belle Epoque period, when fashion had infected the French society, the tentacles grew everywhere, to clothes, gestures, personalities, and prejudices. The individuals were invested in the shift of society and perceptions to an elite hollow ground of Parisian haute couture, born out of the chronicle of cultural shift, World War I, fashion industry, and the social climate. As Valerie Steele in her book, Paris Fashion, A Cultural History quotes, "Fashion is a work of art, cherished, important art, which in this century received honors and distinctions. This art enters the palace of kings and receives a flattering welcome." Paris developed the fashion industry because of merchants de mode and couturiers who increasingly spread the belief that women were suited for fashion. Paris's ephemera for fashion was bolstered by the French media, as Valerie Steele continues, functions as a stereotype of French fashion and femininity that supported both the consumer economy and a French identity of national superiority, ubiquitous to both art and fashion. As the document presented here, the cartoon of two women mocking each other's breasts show the highly critical nature of the French society, where the good or the right tastes in fashion were so deeply intoxicated, which Sam sketches call the sartorial refinement or the true Parisian chic. The imperialism was also so embedded in the French couture industry that the rest were called the faux chic or the outrageousness in the presentation of new trends. Since fashion was the most visible aspect of capitalism and French imperialism, Paris established itself as the fashion capital. Documenting the changes and shifts in Paris as the dominating capital of fashion, Sam captures the essence of women in Paris, elegantly conveying grace and sophistication as an eminently French phenomenon, organized and controlled by a group of people. Sam was friends with everybody he caricatured, and as caricature was an important catalyst for the dynamic shifts in the industry. The thirst for validation proved one's relevance of the Parisian taste being the right taste, reasserting the legacy of Paris as a fashion capital. Embedded within the social fabric that relied upon France's dominance in the world of culture and class, Sam was invested in the continued success and good standing of Parisian haute couture. As we have demonstrated through this performance, when viewed through contemporary eyes, Le Vrai et Le Faux Chic reveals how complex the fashion binaries and diktats of fashionability are perpetuated through the material culture. However, crucially, these concepts of fashion binarism explored in this album are not limited to the confines of past, posing the questions how, when, and why, and to what extent the binaries may still play a role in fashion today.
Thank you.